For years, Welcome to Plathville was built around one extraordinary question. What happens when children raised inside an extremely controlled world finally decide they want to discover life for themselves? That question turned the Plath family into one of TLC's most talked about reality TV families. But by season 8, something had changed. The old Plathville formula was no longer enough. This was not simply a story about young adults discovering television, relationships, independence, dating, marriage, or rebellion. It was becoming something much more complicated. A family that had spent years dealing with control, separation, divorce, grief, broken relationships, changing beliefs, and painful misunderstandings was now being forced to confront something even harder. Who are the Plaths when the old family structure no longer exists? And that is why Season 8 feels so different. TLC itself framed the season as a defining new chapter, centered on the family moving forward, sometimes together and sometimes apart. That description may sound simple, but underneath it is the real story. Because almost every major storyline in Season 8 connects to the same theme. The Plaths can no longer go back to the way things were. And once you understand that, Season 8 suddenly looks very different. To understand why Season 8 changed everything, we have to go back. When viewers first met the Plaths, the family dynamic was radically different from what audiences would eventually see. The children were raised in a highly sheltered environment. Then, slowly, one by one, those children began stepping outside of it. Relationships changed. Beliefs changed. Family alliances changed. And eventually, the parents' marriage changed too. The audience watched children who once seemed inseparable become adults with very different ideas about what their lives should look like. That transformation became the heart of the series. But there was always a larger question hiding underneath. Could the family survive everyone becoming their own person? Season 8 provides one of the clearest answers yet. And the answer is complicated. One of the biggest reasons Season 8 feels different is Ethan Plath. For years, Ethan's storyline was deeply connected to Olivia Plath. Their relationship was one of the central emotional arcs of Welcome to Plathville. They married young, and their relationship became intertwined with the larger conflict between Olivia and Ethan's family. Eventually, their marriage ended. But the legal process took much longer than viewers might have expected. By Season 8, Ethan was still dealing with the consequences. According to reporting on the Season 8 premiere, Ethan discussed his frustration over the divorce process and his breakup with Teegan. Then came the development that changed the story completely. Ethan and Olivia's divorce was finalized in February 2026. The settlement included an agreement that neither would seek spousal maintenance from the other. Think about what that means narratively. For years, Ethan's life was connected to a marriage that had already ended emotionally. Now the legal chapter was finally closed. That meant Ethan could no longer define his future through the question of what would happen with Olivia. He had to decide what came next. And that is exactly where Season 8 becomes so interesting. Ethan's relationship with Teegan represented something completely different from his relationship with Olivia. This was supposed to be a new beginning. A fresh relationship. A chance to move forward. But Season 8 revealed that even this relationship had reached a breaking point. Ethan explained that the long-distance relationship had become difficult and acknowledged that he repeatedly promised to move to Wisconsin but failed to follow through. That detail matters. Because Ethan's problem wasn't simply that another relationship ended. It was that the same larger issue appeared again. Wanting change is not the same as actually changing. That theme runs through the entire Plathville story. The family has repeatedly talked about growth, about independence, about moving forward. But Season 8 asks a much harder question. What happens when saying you are changing isn't enough anymore? Ethan's storyline became a perfect example. He wanted a new life. He wanted a relationship. He wanted to move. He wanted to leave the past behind. But eventually, the decisions that had been postponed caught up with him. And Teegan's relationship with him became another reminder that promises have consequences. It would be easy to watch Ethan's divorce story and think this is simply another reality TV breakup. But that would miss the larger significance. Ethan's marriage to Olivia was not just one relationship. It represented one of the biggest transformations in the entire series. Olivia challenged the Plath family's established worldview. Ethan became caught between his wife and his family. The resulting conflicts became some of the most emotionally intense material in the show's history. So when that marriage finally ended legally, it wasn't merely the conclusion of a romance. It was the closure of one of the central chapters of Welcome to Plathville. And Season 8 arrives at precisely that moment. That is why Ethan's story feels different. He is not simply recovering from a breakup. He is trying to figure out who he is after one of the defining relationships of his adult life has finally been put behind him. If Season 8 were only about Ethan, it would still be dramatic. But it isn't. The bigger story is what is happening to almost everyone. Lydia and Zac are now married. Kim is rebuilding her life. Barry is entering a completely different phase. Moriah is continuing to evolve. Isaac and Kaylin are facing relationship challenges. And the family is being forced to confront old wounds that never completely disappeared. TLC's own Season 8 episode descriptions show just how broad this transformation became. The season includes Lydia and Zac confronting the family about problems surrounding their wedding, Kim's return to the family farm. That is a very different kind of Plathville. The focus isn't just who is dating whom. The focus is becoming. Can this family actually heal? Lydia Plath's story is particularly important because Lydia grew up inside the family system. Now she has created a new family unit of her own. She married Zac, and that changes the balance. When someone gets married, especially within a family with such a complicated history, the marriage creates new boundaries. Priorities shift. Loyalty becomes more complicated. The spouse becomes part of the family dynamic. And suddenly, old behaviors can produce new conflicts. That is exactly what Season 8 explores. TLC says Lydia and Zac return to the family dynamic after their wedding and confront tensions surrounding the events leading up to their big day. That is significant, because the wedding was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became another reminder of unresolved family tension, and that leads to one of Season 8's biggest themes. Getting married does not automatically erase family problems. Sometimes it exposes them. This is the sentence viewers should remember. The Plaths cannot go back. Not to the old farm life. Not to the old marriage. Not to the old family hierarchy. Not to the old relationships. Not to the old versions of themselves. And that is why Season 8 feels like a turning point. The family members aren't simply changing around the edges. Their entire relationships with one another are being renegotiated. Ethan is attempting to build a life after Olivia. Lydia is establishing a marriage of her own. Kim is trying to rebuild her life. Barry is entering the dating world. Other siblings are confronting their own relationship challenges. And the family is finally dealing more openly with grief. Every road leads back to the same destination. The old Plathville is gone, so when fans ask, what changed in Season 8? The answer isn't one shocking event. It isn't one breakup. It isn't one argument. It isn't one marriage. It isn't even one person. The real change is structural. The children grew up. The marriages changed. The parents separated. New relationships appeared. Old relationships ended. New boundaries emerged. And the family began confronting memories that had been buried for years. Season 8 is therefore less about one dramatic bombshell and more about an entire family reaching a point of no return. And once you see it that way, the season becomes much more emotional. Because the biggest story isn't what happens next. The biggest story is that the Plaths finally have to accept that they are no longer the family they used to be. This may be the most important change of all. Earlier in the series, many Plath children were still figuring out how much of their upbringing they wanted to keep. By Season 8, they are adults. That changes everything. They can make their own choices. They can establish boundaries. They can decide who they want to spend time with. They can decide what kind of marriage they want. They can decide what kind of relationship they want with their parents. And that means the parents cannot control the family in the same way they once could. This is where the series' original premise evolves. The children are no longer simply escaping their childhood. They are now responsible for building adult lives. And those adult lives can conflict with one another. Then there is Kim Plath. Kim's storyline might be one of the clearest examples of how different Season 8 is from the beginning of the series. TLC describes Kim as returning to the family farm and attempting to create a future that is her own. That is a remarkable change. The family farm once represented stability, tradition, the old Plath structure. But now Kim is returning to it under completely different circumstances. The family has changed. Her marriage to Barry has changed. Her children have grown. And her relationship with the farm itself has a different meaning. The location remains, but the family that once occupied it has transformed. That is almost a metaphor for Season 8 itself. The setting looks familiar. The people are not ***. The breakdown of Kim and Barry's marriage was another turning point. Their relationship had once been at the center of the family structure. When that marriage changed, the entire family system changed with it. By Season 8, Barry is exploring dating again. TLC's episode guide identifies his return to the dating world as a major storyline. And that is almost surreal when you consider how long Barry had been married. After decades in one relationship, dating again isn't simply about finding another person. It means rediscovering an identity. Who is Barry outside of marriage? Who is Barry outside of being a father? What does he actually want? And perhaps most importantly, can he build a future without constantly looking backward? There is another storyline that makes Season 8 much more emotional. Joshua. The death of Joshua was one of the deepest tragedies in the Plath family's history, and for years, it remained part of the family's emotional background. But grief doesn't simply disappear because a television season ends. It can remain unresolved. People can avoid discussing it. They can keep functioning. They can build careers. They can marry. They can divorce. They can move across the country. But eventually, old grief can return. Season 8 brings that pain back to the center. According to TLC's episode descriptions, Kim eventually seeks counseling connected to Joshua's death, and later the family comes together to honor him. That is not just another storyline. It represents something fundamentally different. For perhaps the first time, the family isn't simply reacting to external conflict. They are confronting internal pain. Why this changed the show's entire emotional center. This is the real reason Season 8 changed everything. The show stopped being primarily about rebellion. It became about consequences. At the beginning, the central question was, what happens when children leave a sheltered upbringing? Now the question is, what happens after they leave? That's a much harder question. But there is still a much bigger question. If the Plaths really are moving forward, who is actually moving forward, and who is still trapped in the past? Because Ethan's divorce may have closed one chapter, Lydia and Zac's marriage may have opened another. Kim's return to the farm may look like a fresh start. Barry's return to dating may seem like a new beginning. And the family's decision to finally confront Joshua's death may represent a breakthrough. But beneath all of it is one uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the biggest change in Season 8 isn't what the Plaths are doing differently. Maybe it's the fact that they can no longer hide from what happened before. And that is where the real Season 8 story begins. There is a moment in every family's story when change stops being temporary. When people stop saying, things are different right now, and finally have to admit, things are never going back. For the Plath family, Season 8 represents that moment. And the reason is bigger than any single breakup. Bigger than Ethan. Bigger than Kim. Bigger than Barry. Bigger than Lydia and Zac. The real story is that the family structure that once held everyone together has been completely transformed. The children are adults. The parents are no longer together. Some siblings have created marriages of their own. Others are trying to figure out relationships. Some are rebuilding their identities. And some are still carrying emotional wounds from years earlier. That creates a situation unlike anything the family faced in the earliest seasons. Because when everyone was younger, the family could operate around a central structure. Now, there are multiple adults, multiple households, multiple relationships, multiple opinions, and multiple versions of what the Plath family is supposed to be. That is where Season 8 becomes especially fascinating. For much of Welcome to Plathville, viewers watched the children discover independence. One person would question something. Another would push back against the family's rules. Someone would leave. Someone would start dating. Someone would move away. The tension came from watching young adults discover a world they had previously been protected from. But Season 8 has a completely different problem. Almost everyone already knows what life outside the original family system looks like. They have experienced it. They have made mistakes. They have experienced heartbreak. They have gotten married. They have gotten divorced. They have moved. They have started careers. They have built new relationships. They have discovered that independence comes with responsibilities. And now they have to live with the consequences of those choices. That is a much more mature story. And perhaps a much more painful one. Ethan's journey is especially important because his story has always been tied to identity. For years, Ethan was the son who seemed caught between two worlds. On one side was the family he grew up with. On the other was the life he wanted to build. Olivia became an enormous part of that second world. Their marriage represented independence. It represented adulthood. It represented the possibility that Ethan could create a life different from the one he had grown up in. But the marriage eventually ended. And that left Ethan with a problem that reality television cannot solve for him. Who is Ethan when the relationship that helped define his adult life is gone? That is a much deeper question then. Is Ethan dating someone? It is about identity. Because sometimes when a relationship lasts for years, the person doesn't simply lose a partner. They lose the version of themselves that existed inside that relationship. And Season 8 places Ethan in precisely that uncomfortable territory. For viewers who followed the show from the beginning, Ethan and Olivia's relationship was almost impossible to separate from the larger Plath family story. Their relationship changed the family. Their conflicts changed the family. Their disagreements exposed differences in beliefs and boundaries. Their eventual separation changed the family again. And now the legal finalization of their divorce closes that chapter. That does not mean the emotional impact disappears. But it does mean Ethan has fewer reasons to remain psychologically tied to a relationship that is legally over. And that creates a fascinating new chapter. Because once the divorce is final, the question changes. Instead of, will Ethan and Olivia ever reconcile? The question becomes, what will Ethan do now? That question is much more unpredictable. And then there is Teegan. Ethan's relationship with Teegan could have represented the beginning of a new era, but the relationship also exposed something important. Moving forward requires action, not just intentions. Ethan acknowledged that the long-distance relationship became difficult and that he had repeatedly talked about moving to Wisconsin without following through. That detail is important because it creates a pattern. Ethan wanted a different future. But wanting something and committing to the sacrifices required to obtain it are two very different things. And that is one of the most universal themes in Season 8. The Plaths are learning that adulthood is not simply about making choices. It is about living with those choices. Reality television often works through dramatic moments. A breakup, an argument, a confrontation, a shocking announcement. But the most interesting parts of Season 8 are actually quieter. They involve people asking themselves difficult questions. What do I want? Who am I? What do I owe my family? What do I owe myself? Can I forgive someone? Can I trust someone? Can I change? Can another person change? And perhaps the hardest question, can I accept that someone I love may never become the person I want them to be? That question runs through multiple Plath relationships, and there may not be an easy answer. Now look at Lydia. Lydia's journey is completely different from Ethan's. She is not closing a marriage chapter. She is beginning one. She and Zac have created a new family unit.